What if I told you that the secret to breaking any bad habit doesn't require willpower or motivation? What if the key to transformation was not about doing more, but doing less? Imagine starting a journey with something so simple, so small, that it seems almost absurd. But what if I told you this small change could be the beginning of a complete life transformation? Keep watching, because you'll never guess what happens next. Welcome to American Wall Street, where today we're diving into a life-changing method that goes against everything you've ever been told about changing your habits. Forget about drastic transformations, complicated plans, and unrealistic expectations. Today, I'll share with you a method that has been silently shaping lives for centuries, and it's shockingly simple. You might have heard of it before, Kaizen, but I promise you've never seen it in action like this. Now, before you dismiss it as just another motivational gimmick, take a moment to think. How many times have you tried to change your life? How many diets, fitness routines, or productivity plans have you started only to abandon them after a few weeks? You're not alone. Most people fail not because they lack the desire to change, but because they try to do it all at once. The human brain resists drastic changes, seeing them as a threat. The result? We quit before we even get started. But here's the game changer. What if you didn't have to change everything at once? What if you could start with something so small, so trivial, that it seemed pointless? This is where Kaizen comes in. It's a philosophy from Japan that teaches us to improve by taking one tiny step at a time. It's not about becoming perfect overnight. It's about the gradual accumulation of small, consistent improvements. So, how does this all work? Let me tell you the story of Christopher, a man who, like many of us, struggled with breaking bad habits. And yet, through Kaizen, he managed to not only change his body, but his entire life. Christopher was 40 years old, weighed 142 kilograms, and had tried everything to lose weight. He tried extreme diets. He attempted to exercise, but each time, he failed. And with each failure, he fell deeper into the belief that he was just destined to be overweight forever. But one day, Christopher's life changed, and it wasn't because of a dramatic diet plan or an intense fitness routine. It was because of a small, almost laughable change. It started with something as simple as drinking a glass of water every morning. Just one glass of water. That's all. You might be thinking, that won't change anything. But hold on. This was just the beginning. By committing to this tiny, almost effortless task, Christopher didn't just prove to himself that change was possible. He began to build a foundation for bigger changes. This small step ignited a chain reaction, teaching him the power of Kaizen, the art of continuous, incremental improvement. Each small success built upon the last until it snowballed into a full-blown transformation. But the story doesn't end there. What Christopher learned along the way was more profound than any diet or fitness routine. It was the realization that change doesn't require perfection, just persistence. Before we go deeper into Christopher's journey, I want to invite you to subscribe to American Wall Street. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on more transformative strategies like this one. You'll be empowered with the knowledge and tools to make lasting changes in your life. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button now and join the community of people committed to improving their lives, one small step at a time. Now, here's a question for you to reflect on. Which approach do you think leads to true, lasting change? A. Drastic, all-at-once change. B. Small, consistent improvements over time. Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and how you believe small steps could lead to massive changes in your life. Let's get the conversation started. Christopher's story begins like so many others. A life filled with daily routines, obligations, and responsibilities, yet one that was slowly but surely slipping into despair. At 40 years old, Christopher weighed 142 kilograms and was stuck in a cycle he couldn't break. He wasn't a bad person, nor did he lack the desire to change. He was simply overwhelmed by the demands of his life. Working long hours as a stock manager, juggling the responsibilities of a wife, 2 kids, and bills that never seemed to stop coming, Christopher had forgotten one crucial thing: himself. His diet was a reflection of his hectic life. There was no time to sit down for a proper meal, so breakfast was eaten in the car, lunch at his desk, and dinner alone in front of the TV. Weekends became his escape, filled with pizza, beer, and a few too many hours spent on the couch. He worked harder than anyone he knew, so he felt entitled to this break. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. His body started to send him warning signals, but he chose to ignore them. Climbing the stairs left him winded. Tying his shoes became an exhausting ordeal. His children asked him to play, but he found excuses not to. Even his wife, seeing how tired he always was, suggested they take a walk, but he didn't have the energy. Yet, the hardest part wasn't the weight gain or the fatigue. It was the look in his daughter's eyes when she stopped asking him to play. It wasn't until then, when he saw the disappointment in his child's face, that Christopher truly felt the weight of his own choices. He had become so consumed by work and life's pressures that he had forgotten to show up for the people who mattered most. It wasn't the number on the scale that bothered him the most. It was realizing that his daughter had given up on him. She had learned that her father didn't play. And as the days passed, that realization became more and more painful. For years, Christopher had tried to lose weight. He had gone to the gym, followed various diet plans, and even started a morning running routine. But each time, he hit a wall. He would start strong, but quickly burn out. His motivations were high at first, but they always faltered, leaving him feeling like a failure. He had fallen into the trap of believing that change had to be immediate, that results had to come fast, or else they were meaningless. The constant cycle of starting and stopping had left him mentally exhausted. He had already given up on himself, resigned to the belief that this was just the way he was, that it was his genetics, his slow metabolism, and the life he had built around him. Then came the moment of truth. One Saturday morning, as he played in the backyard with his 9-year-old son, the unthinkable happened. His son kicked the ball too far, and it landed in the neighbor's flower bed. "Dad, can you get it for me?" his son asked, innocently. Christopher stood up, walked to the flower bed, bent down to retrieve the ball, and found himself unable to get up. He wasn't in pain. There was no injury. He simply didn't have the strength to lift his own body. It was the wake-up call he couldn't ignore. His son watched silently as the neighbor helped him to his feet. That moment, lying in the flower bed, was the turning point. It wasn't about the physical discomfort. It was about the realization that his body had betrayed him. For the first time in a long time, Christopher had to confront the truth he had been avoiding. He had become a man who could no longer care for himself, much less his family. His wife entered the room that evening and, without saying a word, gave him the hug he desperately needed. But then, she said something that changed everything. "You need help, Chris? Really?" This was the moment Christopher stopped pretending. He had tried to fix things on his own for years, but he couldn't. He needed something more, something different. And so, he made a decision. It was time to take that first real step toward change. Little did he know, this would be the beginning of his journey. Not a journey of extreme dieting or punishing workouts, but one of small, manageable changes that would ultimately transform his entire life. Christopher's path to transformation didn't begin with dramatic changes or a strict regimen. It began with a single, seemingly insignificant action that, in hindsight, was more profound than anything he could have imagined. When he walked into Dr. Yamamoto's office, he was expecting to hear about a miracle diet or an intense workout plan. Instead, he was given a prescription so simple that it almost seemed absurd. The doctor's advice was clear and blunt. Drink a glass of water every morning before doing anything else. At first, Christopher was frustrated. A glass of water? That's it? He thought. He had been struggling for years with complex diets and workout plans, none of which had lasted. But Dr. Yamamoto wasn't concerned with the details of Christopher's diet or exercise regimen. His focus was entirely on something much deeper: Christopher's relationship with change itself. The glass of water wasn't just a physical task, it was a test of his ability to make and keep a promise to himself. Dr. Yamamoto understood something fundamental about change that most people overlook. True transformation is not about the grand gestures or the overnight fixes. It's about proving to yourself that change is possible, one small step at a time. A single glass of water each morning wasn't going to solve all of Christopher's problems. But it was a small, simple act that could help him start building trust in his own ability to make lasting changes. And that trust would be the foundation for everything that followed. So Christopher did it. He placed a glass of water on his bedside table every night before going to bed. The next morning, as soon as he woke up, he drank it. He didn't have to think twice about it, and it wasn't a huge struggle. It was just one small act, but it carried more weight than he realized at the time. Each morning, as he drank that glass of water, he was telling himself that he could follow through on his commitments, no matter how small they seemed. For the next 2 weeks, Christopher did nothing else. He didn't change his diet. He didn't start working out. He just drank a glass of water each morning. It was, in his words, a little silly, but he stuck with it. And to his surprise, something started to shift. He began to feel a sense of control over his life that he hadn't felt in years. Drinking that glass of water became a symbol of his own ability to change, a reminder that small steps could lead to big results. Dr. Yamamoto's strategy wasn't about doing more. It was about doing less, doing one thing consistently, and building from there. It wasn't about punishing his body with extreme restrictions or forcing dramatic change. It was about showing Christopher that change didn't have to be overwhelming. It could start small, so small that it seemed insignificant, but in reality, it was the key to unlocking his larger transformation. As Christopher stuck with his simple routine, he began to realize that Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement through tiny, consistent steps, wasn't just a theory. It was a way of life. By starting small, he was proving to himself that change was possible. And from there, everything else began to fall into place. What seemed like a trivial act was, in fact, the beginning of a new life, one small step at a time. As Christopher continued with his simple morning ritual, something unexpected began to happen. The small act of drinking a glass of water was no longer just about hydration. It became a symbol of change. For the first time in years, he proved to himself that he could keep a promise, even if that promise seemed trivial. And that feeling, that sense of self-efficacy, began to slowly shift his mindset. He was no longer the man who had failed repeatedly. He was the man who had followed through, no matter how small the task. The next step, although still small, was more challenging. Dr. Yamamoto instructed Christopher to reduce the amount of food he put on his plate. Instead of filling his plate as he always did, he was to eat just half, waiting for 20 minutes before deciding whether to eat more. It seemed so simple, yet so powerful. Christopher, used to indulging himself with large portions, found the idea uncomfortable. His mind screamed for more, but his commitment to the process made him pause. After a few days, he noticed something remarkable. His body was no longer constantly craving more food. The hunger was often just a habit, not a real need. This principle, known as Harahachi-bu, was one of the key philosophies Dr. Yamamoto was teaching him. It wasn't about depriving himself or restricting his food. It was about learning to listen to his body and recognize when enough was enough. Eating until 80% full, a practice rooted in Okinawan culture, allowed Christopher to find balance. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step toward understanding moderation and control. The change wasn't just physical. With each meal, with each decision to eat less, Christopher felt more in control of his actions. He wasn't restricting himself because someone told him to. He was choosing a new path because he was building trust with himself. This was the essence of Kaizen, small, continuous improvements that didn't overwhelm him but built on each other. Weeks passed, and with them, small victories accumulated. Drinking water every morning had become a given, and reducing his food intake was no longer an internal battle. But there was something else that began to happen. Christopher started to crave movement. After months of being sedentary, his body, once so used to sitting and resting, began to remember what it felt like to move. The next small step Dr. Yamamoto suggested was simple but significant. Walk from the door to the mailbox each morning after drinking his water. It wasn't a workout. It wasn't an intense exercise routine. It was just movement. For Christopher, this tiny act was revolutionary. His body, which had been trapped in inertia for so long, began to wake up. On the third day, as he walked to the mailbox, something even more unexpected happened. His 7-year-old daughter saw him and asked to join him. For the first time in a long while, she wanted to walk with him. They chatted as they walked, sharing little moments that Christopher had missed for so many years. His daughter's presence made him realize something profound. He wasn't just changing for himself, he was changing for his family. Each step he took toward better health was also a step toward being a better father, a better husband. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just existing, he was present. Christopher's journey had only just begun, but the change in him was undeniable. By focusing on small, manageable steps and learning to embrace moderation, he had already begun to shift his identity. He was no longer the man who couldn't make a change. He was the man who could, one small step at a time. And with each step, he found not only his physical health improving, but a sense of purpose and connection to those around him that he had lost long ago. This was the power of Kaizen, the power of small, consistent changes that led to lasting transformation. As Christopher continued his journey of small, deliberate changes, the transformation that took place within him went beyond the physical. With each day, he was not just shedding pounds. He was shedding the layers of doubt, failure, and resignation that had accumulated over the years. He began to realize that this journey wasn't just about getting fit. It was about rebuilding himself, piece by piece, from the inside out. One of the most profound shifts happened in his mindset. As he continued his daily routine of drinking water, eating less, and walking to the mailbox, he noticed something extraordinary. He no longer viewed these small actions as chores. They had become rituals, sacred moments in his day that symbolized his commitment to himself and his family. Every time he drank a glass of water, it wasn't just hydration. It was a reaffirmation of his power to make choices. Every time he ate a smaller portion, it wasn't just about food. It was about control. And every walk to the mailbox wasn't just movement. It was a step toward reconnecting with his own body, a body he had neglected for so long. But the most powerful realization came when Christopher understood that these small steps weren't isolated actions. They were part of a larger philosophy, a way of living. Kaizen wasn't just a technique for losing weight. It was a way to live a meaningful, purposeful life. The principle of continuous improvement became ingrained in him, not just in his eating habits or physical activity, but in his approach to every aspect of his life. As the weeks turned into months, Christopher found himself facing new challenges. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the old habits tempted him, days when he felt tired or discouraged. One particular day at a family gathering, he found himself surrounded by food, the smell of turkey and pie filling the room. The pressure to indulge, to give in to old habits, was overwhelming. His mother asked, "Is that all? Are you sick?" His brother-in-law joked, "It's Thanksgiving. Forget the diet for a day." For a moment, Christopher hesitated. The old patterns of indulgence were still there, whispering to him, urging him to ignore his progress. But then, something inside him clicked. The old mindset, where one indulgence could send him into a spiral of failure, began to fade. Instead of feeling guilty, Christopher simply decided to stop at half a plate. He knew he didn't need to eat more to enjoy the moment. His body didn't need excess. It needed balance. He had learned Harahachi-bu, the practice of eating until you're 80% full, and it was starting to feel like second nature. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about consistency. He knew that a small setback wasn't the end of his progress. It was just a moment in time, not a reflection of his overall journey. By the time Christopher returned home that evening, he felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time in his life, he realized that the key to his transformation wasn't willpower or extreme measures. It was a deep inner shift in how he viewed himself. He wasn't a person who failed. He was a person who kept going, no matter what. And this newfound resilience wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family, about being the father and husband he had always wanted to be. He was no longer disconnected from his loved ones, watching life pass by. He was living it, fully present. As he looked in the mirror that night, Christopher saw a different man. He wasn't perfect, but he was on the right path. The pounds had come off, yes, but what mattered most was the identity he had built. A man who could keep promises to himself, a man who could overcome his past failures, a man who was now free to fully embrace his life and his purpose. The real change had taken place inside him, and everything else was just a reflection of that transformation. Months had passed since Christopher began his journey, and the changes were undeniable. not just in his body, but in every aspect of his life. He had lost over 30 pounds, but the physical transformation was just the surface of something much deeper. The real change had taken place inside him. Where there was once a man burdened by failures, now stood someone with clarity and purpose. He wasn't merely trying to lose weight. He was building a new identity, one based on consistency, self-respect, and the quiet power of small, deliberate steps. The most profound shift in his life came when he began to understand that this wasn't just about a temporary change. This was about a new way of living. Through Kaizen, he had learned the art of continuous improvement, how the smallest, simplest actions could accumulate and lead to significant transformation. But what Christopher hadn't anticipated was that the principles of Kaizen extended far beyond just diet and exercise. They were a way of life. Every small step he took, every promise he kept to himself, created a ripple effect that carried over into every area of his existence. For the first time in years, Christopher was truly present in his family's life. He was no longer the man who watched from the sidelines as his children grew, too tired and distracted to engage. He had become the father who played with his son, who walked with his daughter, who was fully engaged in his wife's life. His commitment to his own growth had transformed his relationships in ways he hadn't even expected. His daughter, once silent and distant, now asked him to join her in activities, to spend time together, and he had the energy and the presence of mind to do so. It wasn't just about his body. It was about reclaiming his life and the time he had once let slip away. But there were still moments of challenge. As his physical transformation became more noticeable, the pressure to fall back into old patterns intensified. At work, people asked him what diet he was following, how he had done it. The temptation to give in to the idea of a quick fix was always there, but he had learned something invaluable along the way. Real change isn't about shortcuts. It's about showing up every day. The progress Christopher had made wasn't a flash in the pan. It was the result of months of consistency. That was the beauty of Kaizen. It was a process, not a destination. When Thanksgiving came around, the pressure to indulge was stronger than ever. The table was full of all his favorite foods, foods that had once been his comfort, his escape. But this time, Christopher didn't feel the urge to overeat. He simply followed the practice he had come to embrace. He ate until he was 80% full, just as he had learned. His family noticed. They were proud of him, not just for the weight he had lost, but for the strength he had found in embracing imperfection. When he felt the urge to overeat, he reminded himself that this wasn't about being perfect. It was about consistency. And even if he stumbled, it wasn't the end. It was just part of the process. By the end of the year, Christopher had not only shed pounds, but had also shed the old version of himself, the one who believed change was impossible, the one who allowed failures to define him. He had transformed his identity from a man who struggled with bad habits into someone who was steady, present, and purposeful. It was no longer about the weight. It was about his ability to trust himself, to keep promises, and to show up for the people who mattered most. The true transformation was not in his body, but in the way he saw himself and the world around him. And in that quiet, consistent journey, Christopher had found something far more valuable than a new physique. He had found a new life. Christopher's journey is a testament to the profound power of small, consistent actions. What started as a seemingly insignificant step, drinking a glass of water every morning, became the foundation of a complete transformation. By embracing the philosophy of Kaizen, he didn't try to overhaul his life in one go. Instead, he made gradual changes, proving to himself that even the smallest improvements could lead to meaningful, lasting results. This approach allowed him to not only change his body, but also redefine his identity. The true strength lies not in drastic actions, but in the persistence to keep showing up, one small step at a time. The ripple effect of his commitment reached beyond his personal health, enriching his relationships and creating a deeper sense of purpose in his life. The lesson here is simple yet profound. Real change doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. We don't need to wait for the perfect moment or for everything to align perfectly. We just need to start, no matter how small the step. Whether it's a healthy habit, Learning a new skill or improving a relationship, small actions compounded over time create lasting change. Now, here's a question for you. What's one small change you can make today that could lead to a big transformation over time? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to American Wall Street. Your support helps us create more content that empowers and inspires.